today. My name is Gina Hechanova Alampay, and I'd like to thank the Philippine Regulatory Commission for the invitation to speak to you today in this session called An Hour with Champions. I'd like to also thank in a very special way Dr. Miriam Cue and Dr. Emmy Villar for their invitation to represent the psychologists in the Philippines. So I thought I would entitle my presentation Championing Change. And this is because personally, when we were asked, how do we define professional excellence? My personal definition of excellence is being able to contribute to enabling change in the service of one's country and discipline. That to me is an excellent professional. For those of you who are not familiar with the field of psychology, we are a fairly young profession. Although psychology has been taught in the Philippines since the 1900s, our licensure did not begin until 2009 when we began to licensure psychologists and psychometricians. The years thereafter saw a boom in the expansion of psychology as well as the demand for public mental health. When people think about psychologists, the image that comes to mind most often than not is one of a therapist, no, providing one-on-one service. But what I'd like to share today is the journey of psychology, at least in the realm of public mental health. And the reason why we needed to think that way was because one, we've had so many disasters, both man-made and natural, that have forced us to look at doing things in a different way. Two, even though the mental health law has been passed, today, sadly, there's still very little budget and subsidy for mental health. And three, yes, we've been licensed since 2009, but there's still a great dearth in mental health professionals, such as today, the ratio of psychologists to Filipinos is still about 1 is to 100,000. Now, often than not, when people think of psychologists, we think about those providing specialized services, no, for those with mental health illness. But the truth is, the mental health pyramid suggests that there are many layers of mental health services. For example, once a disaster happens, what we need to provide actually is not immediate mental health, but basic needs. And then after that, for those who are still experiencing mild distress, perhaps family and community support services. Now, the third level would be for those who are still experiencing moderate distress, and these would be what we call focused non-specialized care. That means that these are interventions that can be provided by non-specialists, but for example, trained paraprofessionals. And then, of course, at the top of the pyramid, you have those individuals who are experiencing extreme distress or who have mental illness who need to be treated by professionals. So that can be clinical psychologists, that can be licensed counselors, psychiatrists, and the like. So, given the needs of the country, what we felt was missing in the past decade was level 3, or what we call focused care. And so personally, my practice in the past decade has been in terms of trying to develop evidence-based community mental health initiatives, and two, harnessing digital technologies to provide access to those who need it most. So I'm going to begin with the story of how we developed a resilience intervention called Katatagan. For those of you who remembered Super Typhoon Haiyan, you know how it devastated the country. And it hit regions of the country where there's really no psychologists at that time. And so our dilemma is, how do we provide services to them when they're so far away and there's not enough mental health professionals in that region? So what we did is we brought together 30 psychologists from all over the country to develop a resilience intervention. So our goal was to help those who are experiencing moderate distress after Super Typhoon Haiyan in order to prevent escalation to post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, the intervention was founded on positive psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, and mindfulness. And what we wanted to do was to just strengthen the resilience skills of Filipinos. It's a fairly simple intervention. It consists of 6 modules or 6 sessions, with each session developing a particular resilience skill. So, for example, in Kalakasan, what we try to do is help people remember their own strengths. In Katawan, we try to help people learn how to manage their physical reactions to anxiety or stress. In Kalooban, we try to help people reframe negative thoughts and manage negative emotions. In Kapaki-Pakinabang Gawain, we talk about behaviors, activities, lifestyles that are helpful in managing distress. In Kalutasan and Kaagapay, we try to develop people's problem-solving skills and encouraging them to seek social support. And in the last module, Kabuluhan at Kinabukasan, we try to help people reflect on what they have learned and what they are hoping for in the future. So what we did is we tried this out and we looked at whether it worked in different populations. So in Samar Leyte, we found that the intervention increased self-efficacy and adaptive coping among adult community survivors. In Tacloban, we found that it decreased post-traumatic symptoms, anxiety and depressive symptoms, and improved adaptive coping among college students. And among displaced survivors in resettlement areas, the program was run by trained paraprofessionals, and it was able to decrease the anxiety and increase the resilience of participants. Right after Super Typhoon Haiyan and all our learnings, personally, I realized how it was important for us to make sure that the next generations of psychologists will be able to provide these kinds of services. And so, one of the things that we worked on in my university, the Ateneo de Manila University, was we developed a minor in humanitarian aid. So it's a multidisciplinary minor with psychology, environmental science, development studies, health sciences, so that we would have a cohort of students who would know how to deal with disasters from a very ecological perspective. And then in the psychology department, we developed and pilot tested undergraduate courses on mental health and psychosocial support. Just this year, I pilot tested another undergraduate elective on psychological interventions. At the graduate level, we also created a course on the psychology of disasters. And then, because we know that the science of mental health and psychosocial support is in its infancy, we really try to encourage other people to do research. And we did research as well. So, for example, we were able to put out a special issue on disasters in the Philippine Journal of Psychology. And in 2020, I co-edited the book on mental health and psychosocial support in Southeast Asia. And then, of course, you know that in 2020, COVID happened. And again, millions of Filipinos were affected and continue to be affected today. And so our dilemma is, how do we help them, given the requirement of physical distancing and the fact that Katatagan was a face-to-face program. So we decided to innovate and try to bring Katatagan to a digital platform. We created 2 versions of it. The first was a synchronous version where we would meet in Zoom for 6 sessions, an hour and a half each session. And we would go through the program similar to how we would do it in a face-to-face setting. And then the second version we developed early this year was an asynchronous version. So we created videos, a class site where students could go through the class on their own pace. Then, of course, we had to know, did it work? No? So we did uh, pilot testing. And for the synchronous version of Katatagan Online, as well as the asynchronous version, we found that both versions increased the people's sense of resilience, the ability to not react negatively during stress. It increased well being, cognitive behavioral coping, social emotional coping, and even spiritual coping. Today, we are happy to share that Katatagan is one of the interventions in a upcoming mobile app for self-care and mental health called Lusog Isip. So this is a program that we created in partnership with the Department of Health Mental Health Program. It's the first of its kind in the sense that it's an app that is both in English and Filipino, and it features culturally nuanced materials for Filipinos. Now, another question that we've been asked is how do you ensure sustainability and scale? And that was our dilemma as well. When we created Katatagan Online, we had no funds, right? And even, in fact, until today, the programs are being run for free. So we rely on volunteers. And of course, volunteers become busy or they have other things to do. And so one of the things that we innovated again early this year was we launched an internship program. So we figured, okay, there are many graduate students in psychology who do need internship and practicum, and it's also good that we train them in this kinds of intervention. So we developed an internship program where grad students can come in first as a participant, and then they go through a facilitator's course, which is asynchronous, and then they become a facilitator. So, for example, today we have just begun our sixth batch of Katatagan Online, and the people who are co-facilitating it are the people that we trained as our interns during the summer months. But we understand there's so much more to be done, so many people that we need to be reached, and we know that we still have a long way to go, which is why I think one of my personal insights is that we need to go beyond training our psychology practitioners to go beyond service provision and um, to be able to do things perhaps or explore things in a different way. So, for example, I believe that our psychologists, it would be helpful if they have a public mental health perspective, if they know how to develop and evaluate interventions, if they know how to train other paraprofessionals, if they can collaborate with other disciplines, if they know how to become change agents. And because there's so much to be done more at the mental health front, we also need to be advocates and people who can work with policymakers to make things happen. So the title of my lecture is Enabling Change, Making Change Happen. So I would like to end with that as my advice to young professionals. So first, don't be afraid to innovate and to try something new. Um, it takes courage, but I think it's important to try new things and to do things in a different way. At the same time, we also need to learn how to listen, especially when we meet criticism. I've I've had my share of critics who don't understand what we're trying to do, but that's part of it. When you're making change, there will be some people who will not accept the change right away. So it's important we also know how to roll with the resistance, but continue to persist as well. For those of us who push change, there's no path. Right? The paths are made by walking. So I'd like to end with this one of my favorite poems. In Spanish, the title is Caminante no hay camino. In English, it's called Traveler, There is No Road. Traveler, your footprints are the only road, nothing else. Traveler, there is no road. You make your own path as you walk. As you walk, you make your own road. And when you look back, you see the path you will never travel again. Traveler, there is no road, only a ship's wake on the sea. Thank you.